So I just want to kind of dive right in. Let's just kind of go down the line and introduce yourself, describe kind of how you fit into the entertainment sector.
I'm Jason Fiber. I'm the head of business products at THX. It's a brand that a lot of people know, but it's not necessarily a company that's been in the same business for the last 30 years. Founded by George Lucas, it's cut its teeth in the cinema business. Now we've been acquired by Razer, and we're developing a lot of mobile technology solutions, both for spatial audio as well as for amplifiers. We're also focused on home media certification and consumer electronics, and working on some interesting programs for new HMD and smart glass display certification programs.
Robert Young from a company out of Montreal, Canada called CieAR, as in viewing augmented reality. What we've done is create a tool set that allows people to create augmented cinema. Essentially, the quick elevator pitch is that you have a live, lifelike 3D character in front of you. You're able to interact with that character, and that character interacts with you. And through a process of talking with these characters and being entertained by these characters, you learn the story just as you would when you read a chapter book or when you walk into a cinema.
Hi, my name is Christoph. I'm a computer scientist and a game design professor at Mediadesign University here in Munich. And I have a background in computer science, but I have a very broad interest in how game art and programming and the rules of a game, the game mechanics come together to create an experience that is specifically designed for a platform. And VR shows us that it's really, really important that we design the content specifically for a platform. I've been working on different projects with neuropsychologists lately that include trying to measure the extent of immersion by affective stimuli and the body response. And also I'm the head of the newly founded Innovation Hub that is attached to our university, where we try to get in touch with industry partners that try to have some of their problems solved by us, especially in the sector of AR and VR.
And I'm Halvor Vislie. I'm the COO of the Future Group, a company out of Oslo, Norway, who's just recently started branching out to the States. We are a creative-driven tech company, and what we mean by that is that when we create technology, it's always driven by a story that we want to tell. We've created a set of production tools that basically enables content to translate between different types of surfaces, all the way from traditional linear TV experiences all the way to the other side of the spectrum for a fully immersive VR experience. We've also created that technology so that we're in control of the entire value chain, all the way from the camera lens in the studio all the way to the fingertips of the user, creating an end-to-end solution for content creation.
Great. I think it's really great that we have such a diverse and broad range of expertise here. And I want to start with kind of a general question. What are kind of the biggest ways that you see VR changing the entertainment industry, and how is this similar, or how is this different for AR?
Professor?
We're all looking at you.
I think the difference is the biggest. It's not the similarity is big, but the difference is big, because clearly, to me, VR has at least, well, I could say the higher potential, but I'll say it's easier to provide content for VR in the entertainment sector, because the real world is no longer there, and that's what we basically make entertainment for. And there are niches where you can apply tabletop games or experiences like Robin is making for AR, but in general, VR is the way to go, in my opinion, to provide entertainment, and AR is the way to go to improve processes in the industry. But there are exceptions from the rule, of course, and don't get me wrong, it's not easy to make a good VR experience. That's why AAA content is we're still lacking that for VR gaming, for example. And in my opinion, this will stay for a while. There are a lot of bottlenecks we have to go to.
I would add believability. The kind of old single screen entertainment, even if the content was really good, you still had the notion that you were not involved in it, that you were a passive participant in viewing it, whereas this is by default an interactive medium, and the more realistic, both video and audio and story, the more you can get engrossed in the content and the more you're going to take away from it and the more real it feels. That's both awesome and potentially scary, but it's probably what will drive adoption, is the reality of the ability to sense, the ability to eliminate the difference in your mind between a passive experience of enjoying content and an active experience of feeling like you're involved with the content.
I would chime in on that. I mean, I think augmented reality, the great potential of that is that we already are in a physical world. We already participate, and augmented reality storytelling is just adding a layer to it. It's adding that entertainment part that separates it from virtual reality, where you actually consciously have to sit down and say, okay, I'm reserving time to be entertained. Augmented reality allows you to do it at any time.
And that ties into to the problem, I think, with VR versus AR. And you know, it's so easy to think of those as sort of tied together, and of course they could be. But I think it's two very different propositions. And I think the market potential for both of those solutions is very different as well. You mentioned engineering applications for VR or even for AR, and that's a whole different story than what you do with entertainment. In terms of our thinking around VR, it's very much, you know, it's a very powerful tool in terms of extending an experience that you would have otherwise. And the reason why we think that is that creation of great content is really, really expensive. And basically what you're doing with that spending is buying the attention of the audience. And I think one of the shortcomings of VR as we know it today is that we know that we have a limited attention span. We know that we're not going to get someone to sit down for 3 hours straight and enjoy a VR experience. As it stands, that may change, but I think that's important to keep in mind.
Great. So talking about these kind of differences that you see in AR and VR, I'm interested too for you guys to touch on this aspect of storytelling and narrative within these two mediums. And interested to get, Robert, your take on this as well for the work that you're doing.
Well, having created now an augmented reality cinema experience, so this is an experience that we're presently working on and will be launched in June of next year. You know, all the rules about workflow and all the rules about traditional cinematography are completely thrown out the door. In augmented reality, if we're talking about doors, if the door is closed, I can't have a character walk through the door because it breaks that realistic experience. So I've got to work around problems like, where is the chair placed? Is the door open or closed? How do I create as realistic an experience as possible? And you know, the door is a good example, but eye tracking, you know, is my character looking at me? Am I looking at the character? And if I move, or if will my character follow my eyesight? Because normal human beings, you speak to them and you know, they follow the conversation. If my augmented reality character does not, that's going to turn into a problem. So the challenges in AR, in creating content, they really have to be thought out. It's not the traditional cinematographic type of experience where you can say, cut, let's do it again. It's live.
And Christoph, would you say kind of similarly for the gaming side of things that do more traditional practices apply to this 3D space, or is it something completely different that we have to kind of navigate?
Well, one aspect of what Robin said is really different to what we have seen so far, but the panel is called Immersive Entertainment, and immersion has long been a buzzword in video gaming, especially in RPGs, and people try to immerse themselves into a virtual world this has always been like super AAA graphics, and now when you have put on a VR headset, you have that immersion you have spatial immersion, namely, not narrative immersion, but spatial immersion right out of the box with a low poly graphics. But now that other sectors like film or music, they don't get it for free. Now they can create experiences where you can look around. That is the lowest degree of interaction for me. And video games are highly interactive, and interaction has the potential to add to your immersion, but it also has the potential, if gone wrong, to completely waste the immersion. Like if you experience clipping or any bug in a video game, and such things can happen when you, for example, broadcast, or when you have something that isn't on the right space. But especially one last thing that Robert said was that. He's doing this in augmented reality, and you don't know anything about the environment of somebody's living room, and there has been so the dynamics are something that is totally different, because a level designer used to be able to design the environment in which the game mechanics work best, and now you have to try and figure out where can his characters have a conversation or something like that. That's a really new problem. And we're already trying to figure this out, for example, in bachelor thesis.
Right.
And it's a big problem. I mean, storytelling around with these types of interactivity, it's tricky because, first of all, I mean, even just with sort of the visual immersion and the audio immersion, it becomes tricky because you don't know where the audience is looking. In the traditional film, you like you talked about, Robert, you have complete control. You can make sure that whatever you want to show is exactly what people see. And all of a sudden, you may run into the problem of people looking somewhere where you didn't expect them to look, and the story is going to miss a piece. And that's one thing. And the next thing is obviously when you add interactivity, stuff that people actually do. It's no longer the story driving the audience, it's the opposite. It's the audience driving the story. And it's really complicated. And I don't think at this point we know exactly where this is going to go. I think it's a whole different set of skills that need to be developed over time.
Right. Do you have anything to add, Jason?
Only from a technology standpoint. We're not a content company, so I can't speak to the content creation, but I mean, one of the areas that I think has been underexplored is the use of sound, and properly putting the sound to be able to deliver cues to focus an attention of the user. So if the gunshot's coming behind you, you want to make sure that the gunshot is really behind you. Or if the person's whispering in your left ear, you want to make sure that the person is physically on the left to your ear.
Yep.
So part of what we're working on is spatial audio solutions that will ensure that wherever the content is supposed to be being generated from, it's rendered properly, it's rendered with accuracy, and it's rendered to your own personal hearing profile. So from a technology standpoint, that's where I think we can help improve upon the tools that storytellers use to build content. But from the perspective of a storyteller, it's just not something that our company has been involved in other than assisting storytellers in delivering their message.
Great. And I guess a little bit more about kind of this use of sound or haptics to increase immersion. Do any of you want to kind of speak to this ability to kind of bring in these other senses in order to increase immersion?
I mean, haptics is another way of cueing a user. There's all kinds of different tools being developed that are interesting additions. There's the vibrating products. There's also, things that will deliver a hot air burst or the, sort of the impact of a push. There's a great VR experience that I saw recently called The Tree, where they actually have a scented oil that simulates the smell of sap and pine. And you sort of start as a seed, and you're in the tree, and you physically grow, and your arms move, and it's a really immersive experience to the point where, at some point there's a forest fire, and then there's a smell of burning around you. So, haptics, smell, sound. The problem is smell is really hard to deliver. There's not like a system for programming smell to be released.
On a mobile phone yet?
It's not quite.
It comes out.
And haptics are fairly limited. So I mean, I think sound is the arena where it's going to ultimately make a big difference. Mm-hmm. I see someone ask a question about the users asking about being, ignoring sound at some point. The reality is that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, I don't think people are ignoring sound. I think people are experiencing sound the way that they're supposed to experience in reality. So you feel like you're ignoring it. You know, you don't really know right now that you're hearing in 360, but you are. You know when you're not hearing in 360, and that's when it becomes a problem. So the ability to mimic the way that we hear in reality is crucial to be able to deliver something, and not calling it out is probably the best way to utilize it. It's just more natural that way.
Right. I see a question about how do you incorporate steering of the user's attention with free exploration that VR offers. And I think this kind of speaks to this ability for this tension we have between being immersed in content and interactivity. So it can be a great thing, but it could also kind of destroy an experience. So could anyone kind of speak to that issue?
Yeah, I think it is a very important question. I think Jason's absolutely right. I think sound done right is a very important factor in making sure that we are able to tell that story. Obviously, there are other cues we can use as well in terms of steering the intention. As the question was, you know, we're working on a VR experience now where that is key. There's a story to be told, and how do you make sure that that's you know, that we make sure the user is following the storyline that is intended. We're working with a lot of different features, tiny details on the way we shift around on visual cues and stuff like that. I mean, there's a bunch of different things you can do. It involves a lot of trial and error, I think, just to see whether it actually does what it's supposed to do or not. And we have a lot to learn.
And maybe the game industry is the right partner to learn this or to teach this, because it's actually been the problem for games ever since, because in the game you are able to you have been able to move with keyboard and mouse, but you have a free field of view, and it's often the case that there's a scripted conversation of NPC characters in a game, and that may be vital to getting the story. And of course, there are ways to drag people's or the user's attention to that part. Lighting is one of them, but I think that's only half of the solution, because if you compare it to film, for example, you may use lighting to focus someone's attention on a certain vital part of the story, but then if you use it bluntly, you lose everything that film has driven to such a high level of expertise, like cinematography, and leaving someone's face half in the dark and half lighted. So when suddenly someone is able to look around, you can't use everything, all those tricks that add up to have the story told in a great way. So that is lost, but you can try to use tricks from the book of level design to focus attention.
Great. I also want to kind of touch about content. I know that I think we could all agree that there is a lack of very compelling experiences that keep us engaged for long periods of time, or that keep us coming back. So how do we create engaging content, and how do we keep people coming back to certain experiences?
Well, I would argue that you know, people are looking for novelty. People are looking for new ways of acquiring content, if you will. And certainly there's a shift from, you know, people sitting in front of televisions to watching games on mobile phones. The content itself, the Olympics haven't changed, but the way people are looking at it has changed. So I think it's a two-sided question. The first is what is the platform that's delivering it, and the second is obviously, is the story interesting? Is it compelling? Are people going to be interested in the characters? Is the storyline something that people can relate to and attach themselves to?
I also like money as a factor. I think you can't be the stepchild to a larger title and expect that people will embrace the VR experience the way that they would embrace the, the main experience. You can't put 300 million into a console game and then put 10 million into the VR experience and expect that people are going to respect the VR experience or interact with it the way they would in the main title. So until the budgets are there to be able to deliver AAA content in a way that is actually competitive with major motion pictures or major game releases, it's all a ladder, right? I mean, we're all on the way there, and I think as much as we think the technology is cool, I think we are still at a very early stage in the evolution of the technology. So it's still early stage people that are embracing it. People are watching it for, movies and news and sort of the being there sort of notion, in the desert or on the war front or whatever. But I think all that will improve, and as that improves, the budgets will grow. And when the budgets grow, then you'll have the money to deliver titles that are engaging and keep people coming back.
And I think it's important to keep in mind that this isn't necessarily an either-or question, that we develop stuff specifically for VR, or AR or linear TV for that matter. I think it's important to keep in mind that we, in our everyday lives, we access information and we access experiences today on a bunch of different devices. Because either it plays well with where we're at, we might be on the bus and choose our mobile, we might be in our couch at home and choose to engage through tablets or otherwise, and we might just want to be couch potatoes and watch TV. But the thing is, we do return to great content, and I think that's kind of the key. And I think to the extent that the audience feels that the VR experience surrounding that adds something to that content, I think it's a perfectly good case to be made for VR, AR, any type of new technology. At the end of the day, it's all about the story you want to tell and how you make that translate between different types of devices. Mm-hmm.
I kind of disagree.
Good.
People don't disagree.
Oh, it's lunch all over again.
So one thing Jason said is that the budgets are not there, and the AAA content, that's for sure, is not yet there for VR. But this year we'll see Fallout VR and we'll see Skyrim VR. And so those are the projects that they don't have the same budget because they're just adaptations, yes, mm-hmm. So ports, if you want to say. And what Halvor said, like, you can have the same experience on different devices. That made true for experiences that have a lower degree of interactivity, like the products you provide, Halvor. But as far as games are concerned, we've clearly learned that you can't port a game from one platform to another. It was kind of possible for porting from desktop PCs or to consoles, but we see that, for example, first-person shooters with this perfect controls, they hit the more competitive target audience on desktops much better than on consoles. Consoles have gamepads; they're perfect for jump and runs, for example. And especially on mobile, in the beginning, people tried to use the old concepts, like there was even a port for Dead Space on mobile, but first-person shooters don't work, and people found out that you have to build everything around the main strength of the platform, and that is haptics on mobile, and that means you have to satisfy people, letting them swipe through menus and touch stuff. And for VR, the greatest strength clearly is immersion, but there are a lot of questions whether this can be done whether there is a target audience that likes affection that is caused by immersion. For example, I play 2D games. I like them more than 3D games because I'm old, and I don't want the degree of affection in the evening. And I think the target audience is between the chairs, because we have competitive gamers that want core gamers that want the affection, and we have casual gamers for who the controls are the right thing in VR. And I see a lot of problems. Cinematic experiences like, let's say, Heavy Rain, there's a niche for VR, I think.
Mm-hmm. I would add one comment, and just as a public who wants to be entertained, we have to recognize that there's a whole creative group out there producers, writers, directors, who are challenged by new technologies, who are challenged by new ways of telling stories. And I think as technology companies and content creators, sometimes we forget that you know, to say, is this going to be a better medium or whatever, is not really important. The creative people are the people who are going to drive content, and they're going to drive the industry, and they're going to give that impetus to create something spectacular. And that has always been the case. You know, whether it's sound or whether it's cinema or whether it's, look, you know, people said that the guy playing on the piano was going to be the only way that you were ever going to watch a movie until sound was added to the movie. Well, you know, this is a constant process of creative people coming up with really interesting content, and the platform, they'll adapt to it, or they'll drive the platform to be the way they want it.
Yeah, I really like what was said about putting it in the hands of the creators, and also about playing to the strengths of that medium. We have now these immersive mediums to work with, but how does storyline or narrative or content kind of create that fluidity and kind of maybe flow in between them? It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
We have some other questions. Let's see.
I like the it's realistic think.
I'm dying to tackle the music one.
Music, yeah. Do you want to take the music?
I'm happy to.
All right.
Someone asked, how about music? Will visuals add any value to a music experience, or will it even destroy it? You don't know me, Mr. Anonymous, but I did spend 20 years in the music industry prior to joining THX, so I feel a unique specialty here. I would argue that the most important development in the music industry, what pushed it further along than anything else in the last 30 years, was not digital music, it's not streaming, it's not any sort of downloadable content, it was the music video. The music video transformed the music industry, and obviously MTV is the vehicle. It went from being a single medium to a dual medium, where you had two senses at work now working together to deliver an even better experience, to the point where you almost couldn't separate the visuals from the audio when you look back, especially in the 80s and 90s, where music videos were really in their heyday. So I think VR and AR are a wealth of opportunity for new avenues of delivering music that are not only a audio and video experience, but an actual interactive experience. Be able to manipulate with the music, be able to share an experience with multiple people in a shared environment. So I, for one, am pretty excited about what the promise of AR and VR are for music, based on how the music video transformed the industry 30 years ago, and how this new medium, once it hits critical mass, can do the same. Fight me.
Yep.
I think you're absolutely right, Jason. I think what we have ahead of us in terms of how we can use this with AR and VR is just tremendous opportunities. Not only to visualize music, but to even tie it into sort of the core qualities of a particular artist. You know, how do we, how do you make sure that you're able to convey to, say an artist has gamers and hackers as a core audience? How can you play with that in an interactive experience, and make that even more engaging and stuff like that? So it's, we're just scratching the surface with it, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the music industry.
Right.
I agree.
Cool. I see another question. What are the largest barriers to widespread adoption of immersive content? And what are the first steps to increasing the audience?
Oh, where do you start?
Yeah.
That's very broad.
So it's a really broad question. I mean, we touched on it a little bit earlier. It's what I call the coffee table effect. Certainly in augmented reality, where you're layering an experience over physical assets that already exist. I mean, that pillar is not going to move. It's there, and your content creation and the system behind it has to take into effect that is not going to move. So I think one of the, whether it's for entertainment or whether it's for consumer or whatever, one of the major issues is developing a system where as a standard, we all agree that there's a pillar there, and the pillar doesn't move. The chairs might move. If they do move, we have to take account of that. And I think that's I think that's something that a lot of people have not addressed or hasn't really come to the forefront, but will be a big issue. Certainly in AR. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that fundamentally we have to know where everything is on a real-time basis in order to give that lifelike type of experience.
I would argue price and convenience are pretty big barriers as well. I mean, if you've ever had the pleasure of setting up a VR room, it is not something that's easy or convenient, and it's definitely not cheap. If you've ever used an HMD where you have to snap your mobile phone into it and then make sure it's aligned properly and that your eyes aren't crossing, it's not convenient. So the solutions that are arguably convenient are bad, and the ones that are good are pricey, and they're not as good as they need to be to deliver the kind of content that the gentleman on the stage would like to be able to create and offer. So I think price will come down, quality will go up, and convenience will increase. And I think when you get that metric, all three of those together, and you add on top of that quality content, then I think widespread adoption will happen. I hate to bring up Pokemon Go because it's sort of like the ghetto of AR, but there's a reason why it was so successful, and it was because it was, you know, yes, it was a property that people knew, but it was kind of a dead property. But the convenience of it and the ease of it was, I think, what led to the rapid adoption of it. Did it have staying power? No, because, you know, after a while I got kind of bored. But it's a good sort of experiment that shows when you take a property and you deliver it properly on a medium that people are used to and it's sort of second nature for them, then you can actually get widespread adoption.
Mm-hmm. That's a classic example of what I had mentioned about the column. Yeah. Putting a Pokemon in the middle of the railway lines was not a good idea.
So I think Pokemon Go is not the best example of a successful AR application, because I think the main reason was that Pokemon Go was successful is because it got gamers out of their gaming scenarios and brought them on the streets, and it was location-based. And the fact that it was augmented reality, it really was, in my opinion, a side aspect, and it could have worked without AR. That's my opinion. And also those are two questions, actually, and I think together they aim much more at the question, when will we see people using VR? Actually, the first question I would say is, do you talk about VR or AR? Do you talk about movies or games, or what kind of experience? But when will we see increasing the audience? 2 years ago, I'd have said that when we have Google Daydream, people we will have mass market, because everybody buys a phone for $500 to $1,000, and they can meet the specs for Google Daydream, and so they invest another $70 for Google Daydream. But I've learned that it's not true, and so now I'm in doubt that Oculus Go and easy setup like Oculus Santa Cruz will figure all problems out. I think maybe we will get into the market by documentaries, VR movies that run on standalone headsets that are cheap. And sure, Jason, once the hardware becomes cheap enough, like really, really cheap, and the quality goes up, everybody's going to buy a 5K VR headset for $50. But will it happen? And I think all the thinking I invested, really content is king, and if we can provide satisfying content, for example, this year with Fallout VR, things will work. Otherwise, the interest will go even lower, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. I think, you know, it's always about the content. I don't think technology, you know, we don't think about it. We don't want to think about how an iPhone works. We don't want to think about, you know, what lies behind the technology. We take it for granted, and what keeps us interested is the story. And it's just, you know, when we reach that tipping point of the story being better on a certain surface, that's when we'll see immersion happening. You know, and people we know that, you know, for a good, you know, high-tech device, we're willing to invest money. It's just that it needs to add value to our lives. It needs to add value to the story. So I think content is always first.
Yep.
Can we get a round of applause for all of our people here on stage?